It had been 3 days since the last wagon passed through, and the girls were still sitting under the same scrubby juniper tree, legs pulled to their chests, arms wrapped tight around their knees. The older one, Ruthie, tried to keep her little sister warm through the cold morning air, but the wind cut straight through the thin cotton of their dresses. She was just 9, but her eyes were already sharp with knowing. Beside her, Susie was only 6 and barely holding on to sleep. She kept asking when Mama was coming back, but Ruthie didn't answer anymore. Their stepmother had said she'd only be gone a minute. That was 2 nights ago. They didn't cry anymore. They were past crying. Ruthie had watched the woman's silhouette disappear into the distance, her bonnet bobbing like a spot of ink in the sea of dry grass. She hadn't looked back once. There had been no warning, just a sharp word and a cold stare. "Stay put. I'll be back." And then she was gone. Ruthie knew she wasn't coming back the moment she said it. There had been something final in her voice. The trail was quiet now, the kind of quiet that sank deep into your chest and made you feel like no one would ever find you. The sun was already climbing, and with it came the heat. They were out of water. The crust of cornbread wrapped in a handkerchief had been eaten that first evening. Ruthie gave Susie the last bite. She told her she wasn't hungry, but her stomach had been screaming since. A crow landed nearby and hopped toward them, black and curious. Ruthie clutched a rock, but the bird just flapped away before she could throw it. Susie started crying again. Her lips were cracked, her voice hoarse. "I want Mama," she whispered. "She ain't comin', Susie." Ruthie's voice was flat. She wasn't trying to be mean, just honest. She had learned young that the world didn't care much for kind words when they weren't true. Somewhere in the distance, a low sound stirred. Hooves. Ruthie's heart slammed in her chest. She stood up, shielding her eyes. For a second, all she saw was heat dancing on the horizon. Then, a speck grew larger. A rider. Maybe 2. Her pulse quickened. Not all riders were good men. Some were worse than their stepmother. But if they stayed out here, they'd die. That much Ruthie knew. She stepped in front of Susie and waited. The horses slowed as they neared. A man dismounted. He was tall and dusty, a day's stubble on his face, and deep lines around his mouth like he'd spent years squinting into the sun. His shirt was patched at the elbows, his boots scuffed, but there was something quiet and steady about him. He didn't come close right away, just looked at them for a long moment. Ruthie's shoulders were stiff, her arms tight around Susie. "You two all right?" he asked, voice low and rough like gravel. Ruthie didn't answer. He looked at them a second longer, then took off his canteen and tossed it gently toward her feet. She didn't move at first, unsure. But Susie reached for it with shaking fingers, and Ruthie let her. The girl gulped greedily, water running down her chin. Ruthie drank too, slower, trying not to finish it all. "What are your names?" the man asked. "Ruthie," she said after a pause. "She's Susie. Where's your ma and pa?" "They're dead." He nodded slowly. "And the woman that left you?" Ruthie hesitated. "She ain't our real mama. She said she couldn't keep us no more." The man didn't speak right away. He knelt down in the dirt, elbows on his knees. "My name's Clay. I got a small ranch a few hours west of here. Ain't much, but there's food and a roof. If you want, I can take you there." Ruthie bit the inside of her cheek. "You got a wife?" "No," Clay said. "Not anymore. What if we don't want to stay?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Then I'll take you into town. There's a mission house. But if it were up to me, I'd rather see you safe on my land than locked away behind church walls." Ruthie looked down at Susie, who was already leaning against her, eyelids drooping. She thought about the nights they'd spent cold and hungry, the hard silence of being unwanted. She looked back at the man. "You got beds?" He nodded. "And chickens. And a milk cow." Ruthie didn't smile. She just gave a small nod. He rose, scooped Susie up like she weighed nothing, and held a hand out to Ruthie. She didn't take it at first. Then slowly she did. The ride back was quiet. Clay didn't ask many questions. He just watched them from the corner of his eye, his jaw tight. He'd seen a lot in his time. Dust storms, rustlers, bad men with wild eyes. but something about those girls hit him in a place he hadn't touched in years. His wife had passed 3 winters ago, right after their second baby was born too early to survive. The house had been too quiet since. He hadn't been looking to fill it again. But now, the space beside him on the saddle felt right, with Susie curled up against his side and Ruthie sitting stiff behind him, trying not to lean in. When they arrived at the ranch, Ruthie took into place like she was memorizing it. Every fence post, every hinge scratching the dirt. It wasn't fancy. The roof needed patching, and the porch sagged in the middle. But there was warmth in the air, the smell of bread baking from the neighbor's kitchen downwind. Clay helped them down. Susie clung to Ruthie's dress. Inside, the cabin was simple. One big room with a cook stove, a wooden table, 2 worn chairs, and a bed on either side of the wall. Clay pointed to the one closest to the stove. "That one's yours if you want it." Ruthie didn't say anything, just guided Susie over and helped her climb in. "I'll get supper started," Clay said. He moved slow, giving them space. As he stirred a pot over the stove, he heard Ruthie whisper something to Susie. The little one gave a faint laugh, the first one he'd heard from her. Later that night, long after Susie had fallen asleep, Ruthie stood quietly by the window, arms crossed. Clay was wiping down the table when she finally spoke. "You gonna send us away later?" He looked up, startled by the question. "No, not ever. I said I wouldn't, and I meant it." Ruthie stared at him for a long time, searching for any crack in his words. When she found none, she turned back to the window. Clay finished wiping the table, then sat down in the chair by the stove. He didn't say anything more. There was no need. But deep in his chest, something had started to stir. Something soft, something he thought had died with his wife. And for the first time in a long while, Clay Dobson wasn't alone. The morning came with the scent of sage and warm earth. Ruthie woke first, the light pressing in through the old curtain nailed over the window. She sat up slowly, listening to Susie's steady breath beside her. For a moment, she didn't remember where they were. Then her eyes fell on the wooden beams overhead, the heavy pot hanging above the stove, and the quiet figure of Clay outside, already working near the corral. It was real, not a dream. They hadn't been left again, at least not yet. She slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her sister, and stepped onto the cool floor. Her bare feet made no sound as she moved toward the window. Clay was mending fence wire with a patient rhythm, his hat low over his brow. The morning sun caught in the dust swirling behind him. Ruthie watched him for a long time. She didn't trust easy, but there was something steady about the man. He didn't talk much, but he looked a person in the eye when he did. That meant something. Later that day, Ruthie helped in the kitchen while Susie followed a red hen around the yard like it was a game. Clay showed her how to wash beans and told her where to find the water pump out back. He never raised his voice or barked orders. He just spoke calm and clear, like he expected to be listened to, but wouldn't punish her if she got something wrong. It put Ruthie on edge. She kept waiting for the shift, the snapping temper she'd learned to spot in men. But Clay never turned. By the 3rd day, the girls were sleeping deeper, eating better. Susie's cheeks had color again. Ruthie still didn't smile much, but her shoulders had dropped a little. Still, she kept a mental map of where the nearest store was, just in case. Clay didn't press them. He gave them room to breathe. That night, a wagon pulled up just before sunset. Ruthie froze at the sound of wheels crunching gravel. Clay stepped out onto the porch. A short, wide woman climbed down from the seat, brushing dust from her skirt. Her face was sun-browned, framed by tight gray curls, and her voice boomed like thunder even before she reached the steps. "Clay Dobson, if you think I'm letting you feed children nothing but beans and biscuits, you've got another thing coming." Clay sighed like he'd been expecting this. The woman barreled inside with a basket of food and a whirlwind of energy. "Where are they?" she asked, glancing around. Her eyes fell on Ruthie, who stood half-shielded behind the table, and Susie, who peeked from the bedroom. The woman smiled wide and held up the basket like a peace offering. "I'm Miss June," she said. I live just over that ridge. Your Clay here saved my husband's hide back in the war, so I guess I owe him. I brought pie. Susie lit up at the word. Ruthie stayed quiet. June bustled around the kitchen like it belonged to her, pulling out dishes and clucking about the state of Clay's pantry. She made enough stew to feed a town and insisted they all sit and eat together. Ruthie sat stiffly, but Susie leaned in, too hungry to pretend. As they ate, June told stories about the prairie dogs stealing her carrots, her rooster with a limp, and once when her husband got lost 3 miles from his own barn. Her voice filled every inch of the cabin. Susie giggled, and even Ruthie let out a quiet snort before she could catch herself. June didn't miss it. She winked. After dinner, she pulled Clay aside while the girls dozed near the stove. "You know what you're doing?" she whispered. Clay shrugged. "No, but I couldn't leave him." June's expression softened. "You're not wrong. But those girls, they've been broken. Especially the older one. You can see it in her eyes." "I know," Clay said. "She don't need kindness," June said quietly. "She needs truth. If you're gonna stay, stay. If you ain't, don't pretend." Clay nodded. "I'm staying." June's look lingered on him, weighing his words. Then she nodded back and left him to it. The next day, the town sheriff rode up the trail. Ruthie stiffened at the sound of his voice, low and even as he tied his horse to the post. Clay met him on the porch. "Just got a letter from Dry Creek," Sheriff Millard said. "Couple girls found out near the canyon road. Story spreading. That stepmother of theirs, she's vanished." Ruthie, listening from inside, felt her stomach twist. "You think she's still in the county?" Clay asked. "No telling, but folks might come asking questions. Just want you to be ready." "I'm not hiding him," Clay said. "No," Millard said. "But some people think children belong to the law, or the church, even when they don't give a damn about him. I'll deal with it." The sheriff nodded and tipped his hat. "You always do." When he rode off, Ruthie was waiting by the door. Clay looked at her. She didn't speak, but he knew the question in her eyes. "I'm not sending you anywhere," he said. Ruthie looked down. "If they come and take us, what'll happen?" "I won't let him." She searched his face, waiting for the lie. But there wasn't one. That evening, Ruthie found a box in the back room with a few old toys and books. Most were worn through, but she brought a wooden horse out for Susie, who lit up like someone had turned the sun back on. Clay watched from the doorway, arms folded, saying nothing. That night, when Susie was asleep, Ruthie sat near the fire again. Clay poured hot water into a mug and set it near her elbow. They sat in silence for a long time. "My real ma died having Susie," Ruthie said suddenly. Her voice was low, cracked from disuse. Clay didn't say anything, just listened. Pa didn't talk much after. Then he took up with Lorna. "That's the stepmother. She didn't like Susie much. Said she was a burden. I tried to keep her quiet, keep her out the way. But one morning, Lorna packed the wagon and said we were leaving. Next thing I know, she's telling us to wait on the trail." She didn't look back. Clay's jaw tightened. "You remember your pa?" "Not much. Just the sound of his boots in the hall. He used to carry me to bed when I'd fall asleep on the floor. That's all. I remember that sound too," Clay said quietly. "My pa had boots like thunder. Never soft." Ruthie looked at him, her eyes narrow. "Did he leave you too?" "No," Clay said. "He stayed. But not all staying means loving." The silence between them grew full and heavy. After a while, Ruthie leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. For the first time, she didn't look ready to bolt at the sound of voice or a creak of the floorboards. Clay didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. The next day, Ruthie helped feed the chickens. Susie played in the dirt with a wooden horse. Clay worked the fence line, pausing now and then to glance at the cabin. The wind shifted. Storm clouds gathered far on the horizon. And somewhere out there, the past was still moving, like smoke under the door, like a shadow that hadn't quite faded. But here on this small patch of land, something had begun. Something still fragile, still unsure, but alive. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed settled into a slow rhythm. quiet but comforting in a way Ruthie hadn't known since she was little. The wind carried the scent of sage and manure across the fields, and the nights were cooler now, long shadows stretching over the land like folded hands. The ranch wasn't big, just a few acres of dry grass, a handful of animals, and a weathered barn that groaned when the wind blew through it. But it felt solid. Clay moved through it all with quiet ease, fixing, feeding, repairing, like it was part of him. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Ruthie didn't speak much at first, not unless she had to. But she started doing little things, setting the table without being asked, washing the mugs when Clay left them in the sink, pulling weeds in the garden patch that hadn't been tended in months. Clay noticed, of course, but he never said a word. He just left her room to move at her own pace. Susie was the first to soften. She clung to Ruthie less and less during the day, her laughter coming easier now. She followed Clay around the yard like a puppy, asking questions about everything. Why do cows chew so slow? Why do chickens flap when they're not flying? Why does the rooster shout in the morning? Clay answered everyone, patient as the moon. One morning, Ruthie found Susie in the barn, sitting on a hay bale beside a pregnant goat. Clay was kneeling beside them, stroking the animal's side. "She's going to have babies soon," he said, glancing up as Ruthie stepped in. "You girls want to help when the time comes." Susie nodded eagerly, her eyes wide. Ruthie hesitated, then stepped closer. "How do you know when it's time?" Clay smiled a little. "You just watch. Animals, they don't hide pain like people do. You learn to read their faces, the way they move. They'll tell you." Ruthie didn't say anything, but she sat down beside Susie, one hand resting near the goat's belly. She listened to the animal's breathing, slow and heavy. It was the first time in weeks she felt like she had something to look forward to. That night, Clay found an old harmonica in a drawer and played a few quiet notes by the fire. They were rough, uneven, but they carried something warm. Susie clapped after each little tune. Ruthie didn't, but her eyes lingered on him longer than usual, and she didn't leave the room until after he stopped playing. The next week, June came by again, this time with jars of preserves and a new pair of shoes for Susie. Ruthie watched her carefully, trying to decide what to make of her. June was loud, opinionated, and took up all the air in the room, but there was no sharpness in her. She brought stories and peach jam, and she scolded Clay like a mother would. Not cruel, just familiar. "She's starting school next month." June said over coffee, pointing at Susie, who was trying to balance a spoon on her nose. "And Ruthie, too, once I talked to that sour old schoolteacher down the hill. You can't raise wildflowers forever, Clay. They need books." Ruthie stiffened. School? Her heart thudded. She wasn't sure she was ready for strangers again. For whispering, staring, questions. Clay caught her look. "Let's not rush anything," he said gently. "We'll figure it out." Later, Ruthie helped June in the garden, pulling weeds between the rows of beans. The woman talked as she worked, about everything and nothing. Her late husband, the year the creek froze solid, the time lightning struck her privy and scared her cat into the rafters. Ruthie didn't say much, but she listened. At one point, June paused and looked over. "You remind me of me, you know." Ruthie blinked. "Why?" "'Cause you don't waste words. And you carry too much in your chest." Ruthie didn't answer, but her fingers slowed in the dirt. June gave a small nod. "It's all right. The world will try to make you smaller. Don't let it." That night, Ruthie stood by the barn and stared at the sky. The stars were bright, scattered across the black like someone had thrown salt over velvet. She didn't cry. She never did. But something inside her ached, deep and quiet. In the following days, the goat gave birth, 2 tiny wobbly kids, white and brown, still slick with birth. Clay was there, and so were the girls. Ruthie held one of them in a rag and whispered to it as it blinked up at her. She named it Fern. Susie named the other Walnut. "They'll need to be bottle-fed if the mama doesn't take," Clay said, handing Ruthie a tin bowl of warm milk. "You up for that?" She nodded. "I'll get up early." And she did. Every day. No complaints. One morning after feeding, Clay handed Ruthie a small book. The cover was worn, the pages dog-eared. "It's old," he said, "but I thought maybe you'd like it." She turned it over in her hands. Heidi, she'd never had a book of her own. At the mission house, they had a share. At home, before Lorna, there hadn't been any books at all. "I don't read good," she admitted. "I'll help you," Clay said. So each night, by lamplight, they read one page together. Slowly, sometimes twice. Clay didn't rush her. Susie curled up beside them and listened too, though she didn't always understand the story. It didn't matter. What mattered was the warmth, the stillness, the feeling that no one was going anywhere. One night, a storm rolled in hard. Wind slapped the windows and rain hammered the roof. Susie woke up crying, shaking like a leaf. Ruthie tried to soothe her, but nothing worked. Clay knocked once, then stepped into their room with a thick blanket. "She okay?" he asked. "She don't like thunder," Ruthie said, brushing damp hair from her sister's face. Clay crouched down beside them. "It's loud, but can't hurt you in here. This house has stood through worse." Ruthie looked at him. "Promise?" "I promise." Susie slowly calmed, her tiny hands clinging to Ruthie's shirt. Clay didn't leave until she fell asleep again. A few days later, a man came to the ranch asking questions. He wore a stiff suit and a pinched expression and said he was from the county records office. "Got reports of 2 missing children," he said, standing on the porch like he owned it. "Girls matching a certain description. Stepmother turned up 2 towns over claiming she was robbed by drifters. Says she left the girls to keep them safe." Clay's jaw tensed. Ruthie, standing behind the screen door, froze. "She left them to die," Clay said. "I found them half-starved on the trail. You can check that with Sheriff Millard." The man sniffed. "Be that as it may, she's still their legal guardian." "No," Ruthie said, stepping outside, her fists clenched at her sides. "She's nothing to us." The man blinked, surprised. "She hit Susie," Ruthie said. "She called her names. Said she wasn't worth food. Said we were just mouths to feed. She left us with no water. If Clay hadn't found us, we'd be bones in the dirt." The man shifted uncomfortably. "Well, these matters take process. There'll be hearings, paperwork." Clay stepped beside her. "Then we'll go through the process. But they're staying here." Ruthie's chest heaved. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it came out in one long exhale. The man nodded stiffly and walked off, leaving dust in his wake. Later that night, Clay didn't speak much. Just sat on the porch with a pipe he didn't light, watching the sky. "You meant it," Ruthie said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "I don't say things I don't mean." She nodded. Then, hesitating, she asked, "Why do you care what happens to us?" Clay looked out over the fields. "Because someone should have cared for my little girl, too. When she passed, there was no one left to care for the rest of her. No one to stand up and say she mattered. I didn't want that to happen again." Ruthie sat down on the steps. She didn't say anything, but she stayed there with him until the stars came out. More time passed. A new dress came in the mail for Ruthie, soft and blue, with a ribbon sewn at the collar. A pair of boots, too, secondhand but clean. Clay had traded 3 dozen eggs and a side of pork for them with a peddler. She didn't know how to thank him, not in words. So she just wore them proudly and started brushing her hair before bed. Susie grew stronger, louder. Her laugh returned like a song that had been stuck for too long. She called Clay Pa one afternoon without even thinking, and though Ruthie flinched at first, Clay only smiled and nodded. "You can call me that if you want," he said. Ruthie didn't say it, not yet. But sometimes when she said his name, her voice softened. That was enough. The land began to change with the season. The wind shifted. The days grew longer. And though the past still lingered like smoke at the edge of the field, it no longer choked them. They were building something here. Not fast, not perfect, but real. And for the first time in her short life, Ruthie started to believe maybe, just maybe, they'd be okay. The warm days of early fall brought a strange quiet to the ranch. like the land itself was holding its breath. Clay had started letting Ruthie take on more responsibility, mucking stalls, feeding the goats on her own, even helping him ride out and check the fence line. She didn't talk much during those rides, but there was a steadiness to her now, like she was slowly putting herself back together. But that stillness began to shift the morning the letter came. It arrived folded in a plain envelope with a wax seal from the county office. Clay read in the kitchen, his jaw tightening with every word. Ruthie noticed his hands trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. "What is it?" she asked. Clay hesitated, then held out the letter. She took it slowly, her eyes skimming the printed words. Custody hearing, scheduled for 2 weeks' time. Lorna had filed a formal petition to reclaim the girls. Ruthie's stomach dropped. Her vision went blurry. "She's trying to take us back." Clay nodded. "But we're going to fight this. I promise." Ruthie turned away, her breath coming shallow. It was like the ground tilted under her feet. For weeks she felt safe, rooted, like maybe she belonged somewhere. And now it was all slipping again. Susie didn't understand at first. She was too young to grasp what court meant, or what it might take from her. But Ruthie felt it deep in her bones. How fragile everything still was, how quickly good things got taken away. That night, she didn't eat. She sat on the porch after dark, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight. Clay joined her, keeping his distance. "I know how this feels," he said quietly. "I've had things taken from me, too." "It's not fair," she whispered. "She left us. We were nothing to her." "I know. She just wants us back because people are watching now. To make herself look good." He didn't argue. She could tell he believed her. "There'll be a hearing," he said. "You'll get to tell your story." Ruthie shook her head. "What if they don't believe me? What if they send us back?" Clay didn't have an answer, and that scared her more than anything. In the days that followed, Ruthie grew quieter again. She still worked hard, still got up before dawn to feed the goats and sweep the porch. But there was a stiffness to her now, like she was building a wall around herself. Susie noticed too. She followed Ruthie more closely, clung to her skirt hem when strangers came by. June returned with forms, affidavits, things Ruthie didn't understand. She talked to Clay in hushed voices, sometimes late into the evening. Ruthie overheard pieces, words like guardian, abandonment, evidence, testimony. But none of it made her feel safer. She kept seeing Lorna's face in her dreams, sharp and hollow, with eyes like cracked glass. She remembered the way her stepmother used to yank Susie by the arm when she cried, the way she'd sneer at Ruthie like she was a stray dog that wandered too close. That woman didn't care about them. She never had. One morning, Ruthie found Susie sitting in the goat pen, hugging Fern tightly. The little goat bleated softly, confused but calm. "She said she's going to take us," Susie mumbled. Ruthie knelt beside her. "Who told you that?" June was talking. "I heard her say the court might not care what we want." Ruthie wrapped her arms around her sister and pulled her close. She wanted to promise that everything would be okay, but the words caught in her throat. She was terrified. That night, Ruthie had another nightmare. She woke up gasping, clutching her sheets, sweat soaked into her collar. She saw fire, screaming, the echo of Lorna's voice calling her useless, dirty, a burden. She crept out to the hallway and found Clay sitting by the kitchen table, the lamp burning low beside him. He looked up. "Bad dream." She nodded, swallowing hard. Clay pushed out the chair beside him. "Sit. I'll heat some milk." She did. She didn't speak until the cup was warm in her hands. "I used to wish she'd die," Ruthie whispered. Clay didn't flinch. "Some nights, when she'd leave us out on the porch in the cold, I'd imagine a wagon hitting her, or sickness taking her quick. And then I'd feel so bad for thinking it, like God was watching and getting ready to punish me." "God doesn't punish children for surviving," Clay said. She looked up, tears stinging her eyes. "But what if I'm not good enough to keep Susie safe? What if they take her from me?" "You're not alone anymore, Ruthie." She dropped her gaze. "But I still feel like I am." He reached over and covered her hand with his. That's because you're still learning how to trust it. Trust that this is real, that someone's going to stay. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. As the hearing approached, Ruthie had to meet with a woman from the county, a caseworker who arrived in a neat gray dress and asked too many questions with a face that never smiled. What do you remember about the day she left you? Where did you sleep at night? Did she ever raise her hand to you? Ruthie answered quietly, her voice brittle, her fingers clenched in her lap. The woman wrote everything down, nodding once in a while like Ruthie was some experiment in a jar. After she left, Ruthie ran out to the barn and cried into Fern's soft fur, hating the way her past had become a story for others to pick apart. She didn't want to be a sad tale. She just wanted to be a girl on a ranch, feeding goats, reading books, growing into herself. One day, a letter came from Lorna's attorney. It claimed the girls had run away in confusion, that their stepmother had been overwhelmed with grief and was now deeply remorseful. Ruthie threw the letter into the stove before Clay could stop her. "She doesn't get to lie," she said through gritted teeth. "Not after everything." Clay watched her carefully. Sometimes lies are dressed up in sorrow to win sympathy. That's why the truth has to be louder. But Ruthie wasn't sure her truth could be loud enough. The day before the hearing, Ruthie sat on the porch steps, watching the sun dip low. The sky burned orange and pink, the fields waving gently in the breeze. Susie was inside, helping June knead bread. Clay was fixing the barn door, humming under his breath. Ruthie felt something deep in her chest. Fear, yes, but also a strange tenderness for this place, this life. She didn't want to lose it. She thought of her mother, who died when Ruthie was 6. She couldn't remember her face clearly, only the smell of her soap, the sound of her singing while peeling apples. Would she be proud of me now? Ruthie whispered aloud, unsure who she was asking. "You've come a long way," Clay said from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. She shrugged. "Still feels like I'm trying to climb out of something. Most people are. The difference is you don't give up halfway." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "What if I break down tomorrow? What if I can't say the right thing?" "You will," Clay said simply. "You don't have to shout. Just tell the truth. Tell them what it felt like." "That's enough." Ruthie nodded, but the knot in her chest didn't go away. That night, Susie crawled into her bed. "Can I sleep with you?" "Yeah," Ruthie said, lifting the covers. "Are we going to have to leave?" "I don't know," Ruthie whispered, brushing hair from her sister's face. "But if we do, I'll find a way back. I swear it." Susie clung to her tighter. The moon hung heavy that night. Sleep came slow, and somewhere in the stillness, Ruthie let herself feel something she hadn't in a long time. Hope, trembling and small, but alive. Even if tomorrow brought the worst, she would walk into that courtroom with her head up, because she had something worth fighting for. The courthouse in town was a tall, square building that cast a long shadow across the dirt road. It didn't look like much, but to Ruthie, it might as well have been a mountain. That morning, she woke before dawn. She dressed slowly, her hands trembling as she buttoned the collar of her faded blue dress. It was one of June's, altered to fit her. She kept pausing, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall. Her own face looked foreign, older somehow, but scared too. Downstairs, Clay was already up. He had shaved, put on his good jacket, and laid out a small breakfast no one touched. Susie clung to June's hand. Her eyes looked too big for her face. They rode into town in silence, all of them tucked into Clay's wagon. The wind was sharp, and Ruthie held her coat closed at the neck, trying not to shake. Each hoofbeat on the road brought them closer to something she couldn't name, something heavy and final. The courthouse was already buzzing when they arrived. Lorna was there, standing by the steps in a new dress and gloves, her blonde hair pinned back, trying to look like the kind of woman who took care of children. Her lawyer stood beside her, a man in a suit with polished boots and a voice that carried too easily. When Ruthie saw her stepmother, every breath in her body turned to ice. Memories slammed into her. Cold porches, harsh slaps, the smell of liquor on Lorna's breath. She stopped walking. Clay noticed. He knelt slightly, so they were eye to eye. "You don't owe her anything," he said softly. "Not your fear. Not your silence. You just tell the truth." Ruthie nodded, her lips pressed tight. Inside, the courtroom was plain but too large, like it was made to make people feel small. Ruthie sat beside Clay, while June held Susie, both of them on the bench behind. Lorna sat across the aisle, her face smooth and unreadable. The judge was an older man with a white mustache and thick glasses. He called the case, and everything began. Lorna's lawyer went first. He spoke with confidence, his words carefully chosen. He talked about grief, about regret, about a woman who had struggled to cope after the tragic death of her husband. He painted a picture of confusion and sorrow, of a mother who made a mistake but had since come to her senses. She never meant to leave them, the lawyer said, glancing at Ruthie. She believed they were in safe hands, and now she seeks to reunite her family. Ruthie stared down at her shoes. That word, family, felt like a slap. It was her turn. The judge called her name, and she stood slowly. Her legs felt like wood. She walked to the front of the room, where a chair waited beside the witness table. The bailiff asked her to swear the oath. She barely heard the words. When she sat down, her hands clenched in her lap. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Ruthie," the judge said, kind but firm, "tell us what happened." She looked up, met his eyes, then glanced back at Clay. He gave her a single nod. So she began. At first, her voice shook. She told them about the long days alone, about how Lorna would vanish for hours, sometimes days, how there was no food, no firewood. She spoke of the bruises, not the ones on her skin, but the ones on her spirit. The words started coming faster then, like she was pulling something out of herself that had been locked away for too long. "She didn't forget us," Ruthie said. "She left us. She left us on the trail with nothing. And she wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She just said she was done." Lorna interrupted. "That's not true. She's confused." The judge held up a hand. "You'll have your turn, ma'am." But Ruthie turned to face her. She stood now, shaking all over. "You don't get to lie here," Ruthie said, her voice rising. "You hurt us. You hurt me. And now you're acting like you cared? You only want us back because people are watching. Because someone else gave us a chance and you can't stand it." Lorna looked stunned. "I used to think it was my fault," Ruthie continued. "That I wasn't good enough. That if I had been quieter or better, you'd have loved me. But it wasn't me. It was never me." The room was silent. The judge leaned forward. "Thank you, Ruthie." She sat back down slowly, breathing hard, tears drying on her cheeks. Lorna took the stand next. She tried to cry, but the tears fell hollow. She talked about regret, about how hard it was raising children not her own, about how she missed them, but the words didn't land. Even the judge seemed to see through it. When it was over, the judge asked one final question. "Ruthie, if the court ruled in favor of your stepmother, would you return with her willingly?" Ruthie's voice was clear now. "No, I would run. I'd take Susie and we'd hide, because going back there would kill something in me." The judge sat back and nodded. They recessed for an hour. Outside, Ruthie sat on the courthouse steps, her arms around Susie. She didn't speak. Her whole body ached. Clay stood nearby, watching the clouds move across the sky. "You did it," he said. "I don't know if it's enough. You told the truth. That's all that ever matters." When the court was called back in, they all filed in again, slower now. The judge returned to his bench, eyes grave. "I've reviewed the testimony and the submitted reports," he began. "While Ms. Hargrove has expressed a desire to reclaim her role, her abandonment of the children, combined with consistent accounts of neglect and emotional harm, makes it clear the best interest of the minors lies elsewhere." Ruthie held her breath. "Custody of Ruth and Susanna Whitlow shall be granted to Mr. Clayton Mercer as permanent guardian." Susie squealed and buried her face in Ruthie's chest. Ruthie didn't move. She couldn't. Her heart was thundering too loud. Clay reached over and gently touched her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. Lorna stood, Her mouth twisted but said nothing. She turned and walked out of the courtroom, heels clacking sharply against the floor. She didn't look back. Outside, Ruthie stood on the wooden walkway, watching the dust swirl up from wagon wheels. Her chest was full of something strange and light. It wasn't joy exactly, it was too raw for that. But it was freedom. It was relief. She looked up at Clay, then at June, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "Is it real?" Ruthie asked. Clay nodded. "It's real." They rode home quietly, but the air felt different. Lighter. Ruthie leaned back against the wagon bench and let the wind hit her face. Susie fell asleep on her lap, arms wrapped around her tightly. That night, Ruthie couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the porch and looked up at the stars. The land was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that felt empty. It was full of everything that had come before and everything still to come. Clay came out with 2 mugs of warm milk. He handed her one and sat beside her. "You were brave today," he said. "I was scared. Being brave doesn't mean you weren't." They sat in silence for a while. Then Ruthie spoke. "I think I hated myself for a long time." Clay didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was soft. "And now?" "I don't know," she said, "but I feel like maybe I don't have to anymore." He nodded. "That's a good place to start." She looked out across the fields, where the moonlight touched the tips of the grass. "I'm not just what happened to me," she said. "I'm more than that." "You are." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ruthie believed it. Spring came slow to the prairie that year, but when it did, it came in soft bursts of green, new grass pushing through frost-hardened dirt, wildflowers along the edge of the fence, the sound of water moving freely through the creeks again. The ranch no longer felt like a stop along the way. It felt like home. Ruthie stood on the back porch, barefoot, holding a pail of warm water for the wash. She wasn't in a hurry. She liked mornings now. The quiet hum of chores, the smell of bread June had just pulled from the oven, the sight of Susie running after a barn cat, her laughter filling the air. Life had settled, not into perfection, but into something steady and warm. Inside, June hummed as she wiped down the table. She was heavier now, near the end of her pregnancy. Her smile came easier these days, her eyes softer. Clay moved slower too, not from age, but from comfort. He no longer seemed to carry the weight of the world on his back, though he still rose early and worked until dusk. The difference was that now, when he came back to the house, he didn't just bring in dirt and sweat. He brought peace. One evening, just as the sun slipped behind the hills, Clay called Ruthie out to the barn. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to him, not expecting anything in particular. He was brushing one of the mares, his touch calm and steady. "You've been good with her," he said, not looking up. "Gentle. She's easy to love," Ruthie said. He nodded. Then he turned to face her, holding something in his hand. It was a necklace, nothing fancy, just a small silver locket on a leather cord. "It was my mama's," he said. "Been sitting in a drawer a long time. I think it's meant for someone who's got heart." He stepped closer and fastened it around her neck, his fingers careful, reverent. Ruthie didn't know what to say. The locket was warm from his hand. It rested just above her heart. "Thank you," she said, voice low. He met her eyes. "You saved me too, you know, not just the other way around." That night, Ruthie lay awake long after the house had gone quiet. Susie was curled up beside her, small and safe. Ruthie turned the locket over in her fingers, wondering what she'd place inside. Maybe a photo, maybe a pressed flower from the first spring. She remembered feeling whole again. Morning came again. Chores were done. The table set for breakfast. June and Clay sat together, his hand resting lightly on hers. Ruthie brought in the milk, Susie dancing behind her with twigs in her braids. Clay looked up at Ruthie. "You thinking about school again?" "I am," she said, smiling. "Maybe in town this fall. I want to learn how to make things grow better. Thought maybe I could start a garden near the barn." "You've already grown plenty," he said. She laughed quietly. "I've still got more in me." Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass. The land stretched wide and full under a blue sky. It didn't ask for anything, it just was. Strong, enduring. Later that afternoon, Ruthie took a walk past the fence line with Susie. They sat beneath a cottonwood tree, watching the clouds. Susie pointed out shapes: horses, pies, a dog with 3 legs. Ruthie just listened, letting the sun warm her arms. "I like it here," Susie said. "Me too." They sat there until the wind changed and the sky turned gold. Ruthie looked out across the land and felt the quiet inside herself match the quiet around her. Not empty, not anymore, just still. She leaned back in the grass, her locket resting over her heart, and let herself feel the peace of it all. Not because everything was fixed, but because they'd survived and grown and begun again.